Hello and welcome back to Ave Imperator Productions. Today we wrap up our look at public opinion with how it becomes crystallized. So real quick, we're going to take a look at a concept that I referenced in the previous part, and that is the concept of stereotypes. Now, when we're talking about stereotypes in the arena of public opinion, we're not talking about caricatures so much as we are a sort of filter to understand the world around us, and that can be applied to minimize the amount of time that necessarily needs to be spent on figuring out what everything is around us so that we can go about our daily lives and fulfill our public and private obligations. With modern technology, it is inevitable that our opinions come to cover a larger scope of ideas, concepts, and different kinds of people, places, and things than our experience necessarily has allowed us to intermingle with. And to add to this, we tend to get that information from outside of our own experience, from other people, from testimonies. There have been studies that have been conducted for over 100 years at this point that show, unfortunately, that testimonies are much less than authentic and believable and are highly corruptible. There was a famous study where a group of esteemed psychologists who were supposed to be very good at perceiving things and understanding how things were going on were invited to a large ball, a masquerade ball. And a planned event took place where a man dressed as a clown was chased by another man with a gun into the middle of the room. They had a scuffle, the gun went off, and then the two ran out. And the whole event took about 20 seconds. And the person leading the ball stood up and said, there was just this crime that happened. If everyone wouldn't mind filling out a report of exactly what it was that they saw and what just happened, we could have that ready for when the police come by. And none of these psychologists knew that this was actually a test, or that this was anything other than the perceived ball that they were told that it was. And so they all wrote these reports, and it was found that upwards of 60% had major errors in what had actually happened and what the brawl had actually looked like, what the people had looked like, and something like 90% had at least 10% factually inaccurate pieces added to it. So if over half of these well-trained psychologists who were supposed to be very good at discerning things that were physically happening in front of them didn't perceive what had actually happened, what is it specifically that they did perceive? This is the stereotype. The stereotype that we're talking about can be easily broken down into 4 parts, those being observation, description, report, and imagining. The observation is the recognition that something is there. So let's say we're gonna take an old tale, which I believe is fictional, but as I've stated earlier, just because something is fictional doesn't mean that it doesn't have an element of truth to it. And this is the story of Aztecs seeing the Spanish ships on the horizon of the ocean. And there was one younger person that went down, and he thought that he saw something on the edge of the coastline. And that would be the observation. There is something there. He went and got other people, and the other people couldn't see it because it wasn't something that they necessarily understood. They'd never seen a galleon before, they had never seen anything much larger than a canoe, and it was sort of beyond their scope of ability to understand. So after the observation was made that there is something there, a description was needed. They went and got an elder from their tribe who came down and looked, and he was able to make the connection that it seemed to be floating on the water, and it seemed to be a little bit too perfect to be natural. And he connected this to the various smaller boats that they had. So observation, you see that something's there. Description, you try and match it up with something that you personally know or that you have experienced. Report, the report is the translation of the description within you to the actual item itself. So after coming to the conclusion that it's something that you could describe, that you have experienced, you report that to the other people. This is a large boat. And then the imagining was when the other people saw it and were able to now observe that there were physically boats there. And that was the imagining within the people. So the observation and the description are both internal. The report is external from one person to another. And then the imagining is the internalization of that new concept. One medium which has come onto the scene very strong, which relates stereotypes with an astounding vigor, would be film and media, movies, television, that kind of thing, especially things that are fiction, because they do all four of these things for you. They allow you to feel like you have observed something, to pick a description for it, and then they report to you what that thing was, and then they give you the picture of it to be imagined. Movies that definitely fit this description and that a lot of people can understand that they have a stereotype of that doesn't actually match up to reality whatsoever are horror movies. Like, let's take the first Alien movie. There is an observation that there's noise, there's something going on there. There is the description that it's a horror movie and that it must be some kind of monster. There is the report that the monster is there and that these people are afraid of it. And finally, there is the imagining of the monster near the end of the movie where you get to actually physically see the thing. And there are certainly people that have had nightmares, that have had emotional responses to these movies. That is why I believe people go to see horror movies. And so they have the stereotype of the monster lurking down somewhere, which has been imparted to them thanks to the stereotype conveyance system, which is the modern cinema. And it's important to note that stereotypes, while the observation and the description have to originate somewhere, they also necessarily require the report and the imagining, which means that stereotypes tend to not be something that a person has, they tend to be something that a person gives. This is one way that people come to explain the larger world around them, is through the stereotypes which have been handed down to them. So stereotypes are those things which are predefined that we tend to perceive around us. When you see a picture of a faraway country, when you hear a report of how a specific nation or group of people are acting, these are all stereotypes. One popular one today would be North Korea. The stereotype of North Korea being a unstable region which is looking to pick fights and that sort of thing. It may be true, it may not be true. Again, this isn't about whether something is good or bad. I'm simply attempting to explain the way that different public opinions and different people think, and how these public opinions come to form greater imaginings within the wider society. And so even though you may never experience North Korea itself, you already have a rough idea of what it is, the description of it, the way that you should think about it, and something of a picture of it in your mind. And stereotypes are not only given down from alive people to other alive people. There's all kinds of stereotypes that are handed down through art and through culture. When you go out to see a beautiful sunset, what is it that you're actually looking for? A lot of people specifically are looking for things that they have seen in art, the different colors, the way that the sun reflects off of the clouds and that kind of thing. These are all stereotypes of what a landscape is. So when they see a beautiful landscape, they already know in their head what a beautiful landscape is and why they should appreciate this specific one, because it's something that they've appreciated before. One way to think about stereotypes is having a window that's overlooking a beautiful landscape, and right next to that window having a landscape painting and sitting in a chair and looking at the painting rather than looking out the window. This is the stereotype. It is a sort of mental image which helps people navigate through their lives, because if every time you went out for a drive you had to pick out what a house was, you had to pick out what a different building was. I'm going to throw a picture up here and I'm going to black it out and see if you know what the building is without actually being able to see specifically what it is. If you can, that's because you have a stereotype of this particular kind of building put up into your head. There's another important topic to mention here with stereotypes, is that many people tend to go in the direction of reinforcing their stereotypes. So when they see something that matches up with what they understand, they'll accept it, and when they don't, they will reject it. And this is a term known as cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is when you're attempting to navigate through your world and you align your stereotypes to the things that are actually there. And when they don't overlay, rather than saying, I need to rethink my conception of a building or of a person or of a nation, you say, well, that's not real, that's not how it actually is, I know what I'm talking about. And cognitive dissonance actually tends to harden stereotypes within people, and it's something that's quite difficult to overcome overall. There is an economy to stereotyping, especially when your private life is what consumes the majority of your time and your ability to think and to act. You do need to be able to drive down the road and think about the specific image of the place where you're going without being distracted by all of the physical things that are surrounding you and trying to figure out what these different buildings are, why they're there, that kind of thing. And it helps the average person navigate through their day and focus on the actual tasks that they need to get done and the actual things that they really care about. So again, a stereotype isn't, in this context, is not a negative thing. It is simply the way that a person comes to imagine the greater world outside of them and to orient themselves within that world. Stereotypes are external, and they are something that's just outside of you, and it's kind of interesting when you come into contact with a new stereotype, when a new idea pops into your head that's imparted into you, and suddenly you start to see it everywhere. I don't usually give personal stories, but I'll give one here. One stereotype that I picked up several years ago was when I found one of my favorite painters, Georges Braque, and I was trying to figure out what it was specifically that he was painting. I'll have one here. And as it turns out, he was attempting to not only flatten the value on the canvas, the value being what is the highest priority for you to look at, the actual subject of the painting itself, but he was also attempting to show the totality of the subject, encapsulating the entire canvas itself. So when you look at this picture, I think I'm going to put the violin one up. The entire picture is a violin. It's showing all the sides, all the angles, all the possible ways that it can be looked at once. And once I've finally sort of understood what it was that he was doing, what he was looking at, it just occurred to me that this was a specific way of looking at the world, that you could look at anything and you could attempt to unfold it and to observe it from all directions at once and try to flatten out the three-dimensional object into a two-dimensional subject in your mind. And there was a while where I spent a lot of time doing that, but it's just kind of to point out that when a new stereotype arises in your mind, it can totally change the way that you see. And the ideas that you have in your head necessarily dictate what it is that you see. So you don't see something new and then have a new conception of it. You have a new conception of something, and then it changes the way that you see. So now we have the definition, public opinions, public affairs. We have a democratic system where everyone needs to vote in order to put a person into a position that will do something that they're hoping that will represent their beliefs. And we have millions of people, all with different ideas, different concepts, different policies that they want to see enacted. So how do you make a common will? And how does a person get elected? And what is the crystallization of public opinion? If you've ever voted before, you may notice that you generally have either a yes or no vote or a person running against another person, which in itself is really just another yes or no vote. There's usually someone that people are either voting for or someone that people are voting against. And this is the essence of what it means for public opinion to be crystallized down to a level. When you go to vote, there isn't just a blank box that says, what do you want? Because if there were, especially like in a country like the United States, you'd have 100 million people writing in 100 million responses. And then what do you do with that? So the people that are at the top that need to be voted in, that need to become a representative of some kind, need to flatten out the playing field, as we talked about with social sets and the ways that the different stereotypes that are handed down come to people in less and less concrete terms. So we spoke about symbols, and symbols are necessarily images, pictures, and concepts that represent an emotional appeal. And this is where the crystallization of public opinion happens. The stimulus of the symbol needs to elicit an emotional response in the majority of the people that are in whatever dedicated camp are the voters. So in America, we have the Democrats and the Republicans, and then a few others. But even within these large parties, there are different opinions, there are different wants, there are different needs, there are different concepts of proposals. And coming up and saying that you're going to do one thing may necessarily upset another group. And so you can't just go about, much less today than at any other point, saying specifically what different groups want to hear without also antagonizing the different groups. And so some kind of symbol which elicits the emotion that these people want must necessarily be created. A couple of these symbols which are very popular in politics are human rights and progress. These are both very ill-defined terms. What exactly is progress? Well, to the average person who is voting for someone that elicits the symbol of progress, progress is whatever they want. Progress is their ideas coming to fruition. Progress is something happening that satisfies either the positive emotions that they feel or mitigates the negative emotions that they feel. And this is the essence of the symbol which must be deployed, because while there are millions of people with millions of ideas, millions of things that they want, there are much fewer emotional reactions that can potentially happen. And especially as of late, it has been figured out that negative emotions are more easily tapped into and more easily used. So generally a symbol is selected that has a strong positive emotion, but also assuages some sort of negative emotion. And the two that are most recent in the United States that are both certainly symbols that are extremely flat and meaningless would be when Obama ran his campaign in 2008 and he had the word hope, and the current president, Trump, when he ran and he had Make America Great Again. When you think about it, neither one of these terms actually has any concrete meaning. Hope means a positive response to anyone that's going out there and that wants to do things. It isn't a particular set of public policies. It isn't a particular set of ideas or concepts to be implemented. Hope is simply a positive emotional response that is meant to galvanize the disparate members of the group of people who would become the Democratic voting bloc at that time. And similar with Make America Great Again, which is obviously a little bit more complex because it has more words, but Make America Great Again elicits the idea that something needs to be done in order to bring back some sort of positive emotion into these people that went out and voted for this particular platform. It doesn't say specifically what needs to be done or anything like that. It simply says that there is something that needs to be done, and you can go and do it by reacting to this emotion which has been elicited. So these various symbols are tugging at specific emotions within the different voting blocks of the people that need to be mobilized necessarily for any political group, political party, anything like that. And this is because the people are actually making the decisions in any sense, in any case, in any place where decisions need to be made. It's generally done by few people because few ideas need to come together and to intermingle and to produce one sound result. But because everybody can't take part in that, because even in a direct democracy, even if you've ever had a ballot initiative or anything like that to amend a state constitution, to a plebiscite, to pass a new law, it's still basically every time a yes or no vote. And that yes or no vote is on an issue which has been predetermined by some group of people. Even if they filtered through millions of responses, they still had the problem of having a small group come together to lay out what it is that people are allowed to say yes or no to. And this is one of the primary faults in the entire system, is that at the end of the day, democracy isn't necessarily about what you want to have happen. It is about voting yes or no, whether that yes is to a positive emotional response or the no is to an actual person over another one. The end product of a democratic system is millions of people having an emotional response and either attempting to mitigate a negative emotional response by going out and doing something, or to reinforce a positive emotional response. In the end, democracy really only comes down to two words: yes or no. Alright, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. This was a fun episode to make. I've been wanting to step more into sort of modern topics for a while. I just kind of wanted to set up some previous things, especially with the series on strategy and on art. It was necessary to kind of have a foundation for a lot of terms and topics to jump into more complex things. As I said, the next next episode that we're going to be doing is on propaganda. That will kind of expand on public opinion, and we're going to be looking at some American thinkers and the ways that propaganda has been implemented, and that will be a little bit harder to stay less biased on, because I certainly have my own biases on the topic of propaganda. But I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, make sure to subscribe. But until next time, remember, Ave Imperator.